Is the GeForce RTX 3060 any good? What should it cost? And what does it really cost? Also, we'll be checking out ray tracing and DLSS performance. And of course, we'll see how much better it is than previous generation products. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today, I am finally checking out Nvidia's new GeForce RTX 3060. It was officially released about 2 weeks ago now, but I was taking a break with my family and a delay on Nvidia's end with the driver due to the unfortunate circumstances in Texas meant that I wasn't able to complete my review before I left. On the plus side though, this has allowed us to take a more accurate look at pricing and availability. But of course we will have all the usual array of benchmarks to go over, and I'll jump into that in a moment. Before that though, let's quickly talk about the GeForce RTX 3060, the new $330 US offering from Nvidia. But of course you're unlikely to find it at that price anytime soon due to the ongoing global pandemic, trade war, and cryptocurrency mining boom. So yeah, we're kind of dealing with some stuff right now. The 3060 is based on the new GA106 die, which measures 300mm squared and packs 3,584 cores, 112 TMUs, and 48 ROPs. Now, that's 26% fewer cores and TMUs than the Ti version, but 40% fewer ROPs due to the downgrade from a 256-bit wide memory bus to 192-bit wide. Helping to minimize that reduction is higher clocked 15 gigabits per second GDDR6 memory, which provides a peak bandwidth of 360 gigabytes per second, so just a 20% reduction from what we get with the 3060 Ti. Now, this change to the memory subsystem meant that Nvidia couldn't pair the RTX 3060 with 8GB of VRAM, like what they did with the RTX 3060 Ti and 3070, for example. Instead, the options were essentially 6GB or 12GB of memory, and 6GB would have been embarrassing at this price point, and with AMD set to release their mid-range parts with 12GB, Nvidia really had little choice. It does also help them market the RTX 3060 and justify the $330 US asking price, which sees it come in just 18% cheaper than the Ti version, despite a significant reduction to the core configuration. On paper, the RTX 3060 doesn't appear to be a great value product, assuming that all models sold at the MSRP, but we'll of course conduct a full performance evaluation and then work out where it lands in terms of cost per frame. For testing, I'm still using my Ryzen 9 3950X test system, and I am still in the process of updating to the 5950X, so you can expect all that data once we get through this latest round of product releases. The system is also configured with 32GB of dual-rank, dual-channel DDR4 3200CL14 memory. Finally, we'll only be looking at the 1080p and 1440p data for half a dozen of the games tested, though I have tested 14 in total, and we will jump into the usual performance breakdown graphs for all of that data, though please note, if you want to see any of the games that we didn't look at, they are available to Floatplane and Patreon members. Okay, let's get into the results. Starting with the 1080p Watch Dogs Legion data, we see that the RTX 3060 was good for just 61 FPS on average, making it slightly slower than the previous generation Radeon RX 5700 XT, which is very disappointing to see in an Nvidia-sponsored title. We're basically looking at RTX 2070-like performance here, so $500 US GPU performance from 3 years ago. The margins are fairly similar at 1440p, at least relative to other GeForce GPUs such as the RTX 2070. The 3060 does manage to match the 5700 XT here, so that's certainly an improvement over what we saw at 1080p, but it's still 21% slower than the 3060 Ti. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is an AMD-sponsored title, and here the 5700 XT was well ahead of the RTX 3060, delivering 22% more frames. And again, the 3060 was only comparable to the RTX 2070, and 8% slower than the 2070 Super Refresh. Then relative to the 3060 Ti, it does well enough, just a 13% deficit here, though we are only at 1080p. That said, the margin remained much the same at 1440p. Here the 3060 was just 14% slower than the 3060 Ti and 15% slower than the 5700 XT. It did match the vanilla RX 5700, and that meant it was just a few frames faster than the RTX 2070. The RTX 3060, like most modern GPUs, performed very well in Death Stranding at 1080p, hitting 129 FPS on average to match the GTX 1080 Ti and RX 5700. That said, it was 11% slower than the 5700 XT and 19% slower than the 3060 Ti. The 1440p data for the most part is much of the same, 10% slower than the 5700 XT, though it was now 20% slower than the 3060 Ti. It again matched the RX 5700, and that meant it was 9% faster than the RTX 2070. You can play Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 at 1080p, maxed out with an RTX 3060, though you are only looking at performance that's equivalent to the RTX 2060 Super, RTX 2070 or RX 5700 with 40 FPS on average. Then at 1440p it does roughly match the 5700 XT and RTX 2070 with 32 FPS on average, which is just playable here in my opinion. Certainly not playable for a shooter style game, but for this simulator it does work. Moving on, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and here the RTX 3060 rendered 123 FPS on average at 1080p, which saw it basically match the 5700 XT to come in 21% slower than the 3060 Ti. When compared to the previous generation base model RTX 2060, which came in at a similar price, the 3060 was 18% faster. Then at 1440p we drop down to what is still a highly playable 83 FPS, and again the RTX 3060 is seen matching the 5700 XT, making it 23% slower than the 3060 Ti. The last game we're going to look at is Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, and at 1080p we see that the RTX 3060 was good for 292 FPS, which made it a little bit faster than the 2070 Super and placed it roughly on par with the RTX 2080 and 5700 XT, so less impressive when compared to the previous generation AMD GPU. Still, it was 12% faster than the similarly priced RX 5700, though that's not exactly huge progress. Again, we find that the 1440p data is quite similar to what we saw at 1080p. The RTX 3060 is roughly on par with the 2070 Super and 5700 XT, making it marginally faster than the vanilla 5700, but 21% slower than the 3060 Ti. Okay, so here's a look at the 1080p 14 game average data, and here we see that the RTX 3060 is just 6% faster than the RX 5700 on average, so in terms of progress, that kind of sucks given the MSRP is just 6% lower. That means when compared to the 2-year-old AMD GPU, you're getting on average 6% more performance for what should be a 6% price saving, so not exactly amazing stuff there. And when compared to Nvidia's own previous offerings, the 3060 looks a bit more impressive, offering 15% more performance than the 2-year-old 2060 Super while costing 8% less. Of course, Turing was never particularly great value, but looking exclusively at Nvidia products, the 3060 is quite good. And the 1440p data really does tell a similar story. Here the RTX 3060 was on average 8% faster than the RX 5700 and 5% slower than the XT model. And this time it was 17% faster than the 2060 Super and 22% slower than the 3060 Ti. Now, here's a look at the controversial MSRP based cost per frame data. And I should note that there are RTX 3060s listed for $330 US over at places like Newegg.com, but whether or not you'll ever be able to get stock for those models is hard to say. There's certainly no stock right now, and I suppose no surprises there. When compared to the AMD situation though, it does look better. For example, the RX 6800, which has an MSRP of $580 US, sees the cheapest model over at Newegg.com listed at $680 US, with most priced well over $700, and again, all of them are out of stock. It is possible that the MSRP prices for the GeForce cards over on Newegg.com is a ploy by Nvidia to claim the MSRP, forcing AIBs to advertise base model cards while never actually stocking them. Though we're not sure that theory is correct, given that we have heard from people who managed to snap up an RTX 3070 and say a 3080 model at the MSRP from places like Newegg.com. But whatever the case, supply of those models is even more limited, and quite clearly for the vast majority of shoppers, the MSRP means nothing. Still, for future viewers, or just those of you who are interested in how the RTX 3060 stacks up at the claimed MSRP, let's quickly go over that data before looking at more realistic pricing. At $330 US, the RTX 3060 is slightly worse value than the 3060 Ti in terms of cost per frame, coming in at a 6% premium. Given the 3060 Ti is 12% better value than the 3070, you'd expect the 3060 to cost no more than $280 US, so $50 US less than the actual MSRP. When compared to previous generation products such as the Radeon RX 5700 XT, the RTX 3060 is just a 14% improvement in cost per frame, so that's not terribly great progress after 2 years. So at the time of making this video, major PC parts retailers such as Newegg didn't have a single RTX 3080, 3070, 3060 Ti or 3060 in stock, and even the part bundles where you have to buy a motherboard and memory were also out of stock. And that means if you want to buy a card right now, your best bet is to pay scalper prices over at eBay, something we strongly recommend you resist doing. But what we're looking at here is the average sale price of completed listings for products over the past week at eBay. I have manually gathered this data, and any dodgy listings like $500 RTX 3090s for example were ignored. Of this bunch, the cheapest model was the GeForce RTX 2060 for $505 US on average, roughly a 45% increase over the MSRP, resulting in a cost per frame of $8.01, when it should be $5.55. As for the RTX 3060, it comes in at $9.44 per frame, and while that does make it the cheapest of the GeForce 30 series, it was only a percent cheaper than the RTX 3070. This data though really is meaningless, as the average sale price for the RTX 3060 was $793 US, a 140% markup over the MSRP. Certainly no one should pay that for an RTX 3060, but that's the pricing situation now for models that are more readily available. Before wrapping up the benchmark graphs, we still have to take a quick look at ray tracing and DLSS performance, along with power consumption overclocking. Stuff like thermal performance will come via individual AIB card reviews, because obviously that information will vary depending on which model we're looking at. Now, for the RT and DLSS testing, please note I'm using the second highest quality preset for the 3 games tested, so not the maximum in-game quality settings. I'm also only testing at 1440p, as Tim and I agree that 1080p is for $200 US GPUs, especially when prioritizing visual quality over high frame rates. So in Watch Dogs Legion at 1440p, the RTX 3060 was good for just 62 FPS on average, at the native resolution. Enabling quality DLSS boosted the frame rate by 30% to 81 FPS, so a very nice performance upgrade there. Now, with medium quality ray tracing enabled in conjunction with DLSS, the frame rate dropped below 60 FPS to 54 FPS on average. Not amazing, but certainly still playable. Then with the ultra quality ray tracing, the frame rate dropped to 49 FPS. Again, not great, but the game was still playable depending on your requirements. Now, without the aid of DLSS, the game was unplayable using ray tracing on the RTX 3060 at 1440p, as frame rates dropped well below 40 FPS. At least that's what I deem unplayable in a game like Watch Dogs Legion. Now, when compared to the RTX 2060, the 3060 was 13% faster when comparing rasterization performance with and without DLSS enabled. However, with ray tracing enabled, the 3060 was much more efficient, delivering up to 26% better performance. And the inclusion of the RX 6800 also shows just how poorly AMD's RDNA 2 GPUs perform with ray tracing enabled, at least in these Nvidia optimized titles. Here the RX 6800 was 65% faster than the RTX 3060 without ray tracing enabled, but with it enabled, the Radeon GPU was just 31% faster and 16% faster with the ultra quality RT settings. Shadow of the Tomb Raider only uses ray tracing for shadows, and DLSS doesn't work nearly as well in this title, offering almost no performance uplift without ray tracing enabled. This time the RTX 3060 was 16 to 20% faster than the 2060 with ray tracing enabled, while it was just 11% faster for straight rasterization performance. The performance uplift offered by DLSS in Control is massive. Here the RTX 3060 was 61% faster with DLSS enabled, and this meant medium quality ray tracing with DLSS was able to match native resolution performance, though do keep in mind we're only testing the game using the medium quality preset. When compared to the RTX 2060, the 3060 was 25% faster for rasterization performance, and we saw similar margins with ray tracing and DLSS enabled. When it comes to power consumption, the RTX 3060 isn't particularly impressive, using only slightly less power than the RTX 3060 Ti. At least that was the case for our Gigabyte RTX 3060 Eagle model that I use for testing. When compared to the RTX 3060 Ti, we're only looking at a 2% reduction in total system usage. Now, here's a better look at graphics card power consumption using PCAT. Here we find the RTX 3060 does consume 12% less power than the 3060 Ti model, but given it was on average 22% slower, that's not a good result for power efficiency. It is a little more efficient than the 2060 Super, for example, consuming 6% more power for 17% more performance on average, so it is an improvement, but not really an amazing improvement. Now, here's a very brief look at overclocking. The Gigabyte Eagle overclocked from the stock boost frequency of 1777 MHz up to 1997 MHz, which resulted in a sustained game clock speed of 2.1 GHz. The memory also overclocked from the stock 15 gigabits per second transfer speed to 17.2 gigabits per second. And this manual overclock improved performance in Shadow of the Tomb Raider by 10%, taking the average frame rate from 83 FPS up to 91 FPS. Basically 2070 Super performance in this title. That's a pretty typical Ampere overclock, so nothing really unexpected here. Okay, so we're now at the conclusion of my review. So what do I make of the RTX 3060? I think if it were more normal times, as in you could actually buy a graphics card at or very near the MSRP, the RTX 3060 would be a bit of a flop. It really doesn't bring anything new to the table. It's technically worse value than the part above it, the 3060 Ti, and yeah, it does pack a bit more VRAM, but at this price point, I think 8GB is still enough, at least for now. But VRAM aside, the RTX 3060 really has very little going for it, again, assuming the MSRP is met. For RTX 2060 owners, it's a very small upgrade, and it's almost a side grade for 2060 Super owners, while it's a downgrade for anyone with a 5700 XT. If you're coming as far back as Pascal and own a GTX 1060 or even a 1070, the RTX 3060 is a decent upgrade in terms of performance, but you'd be far better off spending a little bit more money on the Ti version or waiting to see what AMD does at this price point. But don't get me wrong, the RTX 3060 certainly isn't a bad product. It's technically very good. It's just the price that's a letdown here. Ideally, in my opinion, it needs to be at least $50 US less, but that also brings us to the current market situation. It's quite obvious that right now Nvidia sees little point in making the RTX 3060 a good value product, the kind of product it should and would need to be during more normal times. It really can represent very poor value right now, and Nvidia will still be able to sell as many of them as they can produce, evidenced by the fact that it sold out instantly. Even if the market was to return to normality later this year, something we're not expecting by the way, Nvidia can simply refresh the 3060 series with a super variant and adjust pricing to whatever's appropriate at the time. So yeah, the RTX 3060, it kind of sucks in terms of value, but it also doesn't matter right now as gamers and miners are going to fight over whatever stock is available. And at this point, I don't really expect Nvidia or AMD to release any good value GPUs, especially while the demand remains exceedingly high, and I suspect we're probably going to go a little bit further backwards before things start to improve. And that's going to do it for my review. Sorry for the delay in getting this content out. Unfortunately, the timing just didn't work out for us, but things will be returning to normal and we'll be on top of all the other product launches. Also, Hardware Unboxed has 2 new kittens even. You want to sit still? They're just looking around. They haven't been in here before. But anyway, my daughters each got a cat. Apparently, cats are something that tech channels have to have. So, 2 new kittens. I'll probably do some BTS videos for the Float Plane and Patreon members so you can get to know these guys and keep an eye on their progress. But anyway, they want to play at the moment, so I'll let them go do that. Anyway, something random. So Gamers Nexus has cats, Tim has a cat, now I've got 2 cats. So I think that means I am winning. Not sure on that one. Anyway, yeah, we do have Float Plane, Patreon if you want to get more involved with the channel, Discord chat, live streams, Q&As, all that kind of stuff. They're starting to pull things apart. Anyway, probably should wrap this one up. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll see you again next time. Say hello, Hub viewers. No, they just want to pull things apart and explore.